IBM Storage Fusion HCI uses Red Hat OpenShift bare metal IB installation mechanism, and it requires DNS and DHCP records created prior to starting installation. This video covers critical requirements of DHCP and DNS configuration for IBM Storage Fusion HCI. In this video, we are using Linux-based DNS and DHCP servers. The commands are run on that Linux server to configure the DNS and DHCP. Equivalent configurations should be done on your DHCP and DNS servers. For example, Windows-based DHCP and DNS servers, DNS mask, or any other equivalent services for DHCP and DNS that you are using. Let us start with DHCP. We are looking at this example DHCP configuration file. Here, let us assume that it is a basic configuration where we only have 6 base nodes. But the same format and naming convention would follow if there were to be more nodes in the cluster to be deployed. These are the standard DHCP configurations where you see your gateway, subnet mask, and so on. But what is important here is your domain name and your domain search options, which should match your OpenShift container platform subdomain that is going to be deployed on your cluster. So this part of the subdomain is your cluster name, and this part of the subdomain is your base domain. The cluster has 3 control nodes, and a minimum of 3 compute nodes, based on your rack configuration. There could be more compute nodes, but assuming the minimum configuration, that would be 3 control nodes. And then there is a temporary bootstrap VM that gets created for initial bootstrapping of the OpenShift cluster. And that VM also requires an IP reservation and a post name reservation. So this is that additional entry. If you look at all these entries, all the nodes and the temporary bootstrap, they all share the same subdomain. So this is critical to ensuring that all these subdomains for the nodes and the bootstrap have the correct and same subdomain name in the DHCP. These MAC addresses are what you will have received from the TDA sheet for every node. So these need to be pulled out from there even for the bootstrap. There would be an entity that needs to be pulled out from the TDA sheet. Double check that this exactly matches your sheet. For this post name option, HCI requires a fully qualified domain name. It does not work on short names. The host name is required, and we must set up the DHCP with this option, so that when the DHCP requests get requests from OpenShift nodes while booting, it sends the complete host name and not just the host name. Now, as we have just covered DHCP, let us look at DNS configuration in this environment. DNS also requires a lookup and reverse lookup records be available for the node's bootstrap and API endpoint. Let us look at the configuration. We have the same subdomain used here. This is the API endpoint, which would become the OCP API endpoint hostname, and there needs to be an IP reservation for this IP. So this IP should not be used already, and an entry needs to be made for this with the subdomain here. Based on the subdomain, it becomes api.rackm02.mydomain.com, and lookup is done on rackm02.mydomain.com result to 192.18.2.22. Next, let us see the ingress endpoint. So for the OpenShift console and all the application workloads, the ingress URL is used, and an IP reservation is required for that. Also, again, this is an unused or free available IP for the VIP assignment, and this should again have a reservation. This is a wildcard reservation. Again, as we had seen in the DHCP configuration for the bootstrap, which is a temporary VM. But we require a lookup record for this again. If you remember, we started with a minimum configuration as a sample. So these are the 3 control nodes here. Notice that we have used the short names, and these are the same IPs that are there in our DHCP. So they should match if we have made a reservation for control 1, 25 in DHCP. Then the same lookup entry should be made here. The same follows for all the nodes that are part of your OpenShift cluster. And this is not just applicable for the initial install, even for the upsizing. The nodes as a data additional nodes entry should come in here. And you should make sure that after any change in your DHCP or your DNS configuration, you restart the service for those changes to get into it. So we've already looked at the DNS lookup or the lookup records. Next, we need to do the reverse lookup. So we should be able to do a mapping from a given IP or a node IP to its host name. mydomain.com is where we start. This is the IP, or the last part of our IP, that we had reserved and entered in ours lookup configuration file for the name service, our DNS lookup file. These are the PTR records. Lookup for the IP ending with 22 must return api.rackm02.mydomain.com. Similarly, we should have a reverse lookup entry for the bootstrap.com. Notice that we don't have a reverse lookup for Ingress because it's a wildcard VIP. There is no reverse lookup for that. But to test that the lookup works, we can do the card entry lookup. That will be seen after this file walkthrough. We have the entries again for all control nodes and the compute nodes, and they all follow the post name, .cluster name, and .domain name format. That concludes our DNS configuration. This completes the DNS and DHCP configuration for a successful HCI installation. Ensure you complete all other prerequisites to install IBM Storage Fusion HCI. Consult the product documentation for more details.